Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kuba Debczyński. I'm the curator of public programs here at MSN Warsaw. Thank you very much for joining us today for the second event accompanying the exhibition, The Woman Question 1550-2025. It is a very special night for us. It's a fruit of a collaboration between the museum and Marginesy publishing house. And we worked together to bring Katy Hessel here to Warsaw for the very first time. Katy, I think, needs no introduction. She's an art historian, writer, and author of two important and very enjoyable books, The Story of Art Without Men, that I assume most of you know very well. But we are tonight also launching, or even pre-launching, because the official launch is tomorrow, the new book, Polish edition of the new book by Katy Hessel, How to Live an Artful Life. Of course, you can purchase both of the books in our bookstore during or preferably after the talk. The conversation tonight is hosted by Alison Gingeras, the wonderful art historian, curator of the show, The Woman Question, that I hope all of you already saw or are planning to see very soon, and you definitely should see it. So the plan for the evening is as follows. We'll start with the conversation between Alison and Katy that will bring in conversation the book and the show. Then we'll be happy to take your questions. So if you have anything to share, you want to ask anything, please remember it and hold it until the very end. After the questions, there will be a little surprise. I won't say anything more at the moment. And then after this surprise, Katy will be signing books. So again, if you want to have your copy signed, bring it here or purchase it at the bookstore. Katy, thank you so much for coming and visiting us. And the floor is yours, Alison and Katy.
One of the most striking things, one of them, that I came across in my research doing this project was the nickname that Rosa Bonheur gave the Union of Women Painters and Sculptors. She called it the Sisterhood of the Brush. And tonight I feel like we are continuing the Sisterhood of the Brush, meeting Katy here. And, you know, we know each other, but we've never had a conversation like this before. And it feels really special after this many days of events around the show. And I guess I want to start by asking you about the book, and then maybe we could segue into a kind of hopefully organic conversation. What I did was I pulled images from the show and paired them with some of the quotes from the book. But before we talk about that, please tell us, like, it's so surprising to me, the format of your follow-up to your major bestseller, The History of Art Without Men. How did you come up with this idea for this book? Can you explain to us a little bit about your journey?
Absolutely. So my first book, The Story of Art Without Men, came out in 2023 in America. And to be honest, I mean, this book is kind of 1.5. I've been working on another book that's coming out in a couple of years, and for a number of years now. And, you know, there was that kind of anxiety around the second book, the second album, you know, and feeling so kind of in my head about it that actually you kind of rack yourself with kind of anxiety and you can't really do anything about it. And actually, what I have been doing for the last 10 years is interviewing artists, and especially for my podcast, which is broadcasting them for the last 6 years. And I've interviewed hundreds of artists and scholars and curators and family members of artists. And, you know, after every single interview, I always kind of get up I get the transcript, and I make a note of what they've taught me. So it might be their approach to photography, it might be their approach to painting, it might be their take on routines or something about life. Maybe it's about love. I mean, Tracy Emin teaches me so much about romance. Marina Abramovich teaches me about doing nothing and the power of that. And so in a way, I kind of wrote this in between these books.
Wow.
Because I wanted to write something that would lift me out of this kind of rut that I was in. I was distracted, I was uninspired. And so what this book is it's a quote by an artist or writer for every single day of the year. And these can range from routines, prompts, encouragements, musings on their works. And in a way, I kind of wrote it for myself. And it's a way to kind of say, why do we love art? So much of your exhibition is about community. It's about sharing ideas and knowledge. It's what you talked about earlier. And, for example, Hilton Als, one of the fantastic critics at The New Yorker. He was on my podcast a few years ago and he said, Katy, if we have language, it is our duty to share that language. Right. And actually, I think it makes the world just so much of a kind of better place if you encourage that way of thinking. And it's divided, so the book sort of takes the form of there's a quote by an artist or writer for every day of the year, and then I respond to it as a way for it to kind of apply to your life. So perhaps you're not an artist or you don't work in the arts, but you want to kind of add a bit of creativity to your day. It serves that purpose, I think, and it's definitely when I feel stuck or I want to work out how to find ideas or how to look at something a bit different, I look at artists for wisdom.
Well, I was really taken aback because I have to say I like to do my homework, but I thought we were talking about the Polish translation at first of The History of Art Without Men. So when I finally, at 3 a.m., read the email about what we were doing, I was like, shit. But then in my speed reading and in preparing for the talk, I was thinking a lot about what I've learned here at MSN, and one of the big, sort of departmental concerns, or there's even a department about accessibility. And you use this format that in the snobby art world, people might say self-help, this format has no business being. But what I love about your work, whether it's the podcast, the first book, and even this book, is that you make very complex and sometimes intimidating material so accessible. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that came to you? This ethos, does it come from feminism, do you think?
I think definitely. We stand on the shoulders of so many people. We stand on the shoulders of people in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 19th century, but also people like Artemisia Gentileschi, who was writing herself into the canon in the 1600s and was declaring herself to be seen and showing us art history from a female perspective. One of the most important works that I couldn't believe that I was seeing again was the Artemisia, Susanna and the Elders. And if you go into a kind of European-focused museum, chances are there'll be a Susanna and the Elders, and chances are it will be sort of hypersexualized. It's a story that comes from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, and it follows the young, virtuous woman, Susanna, who's bathing in her garden when two lecherous men try and seduce her. It's a story of torment and violence, and in a way, in art history, it's there to be, ogled and there to be kind of sexualized and idealized. And what Artemisia does is she shows it what that is like from the perspective of Susanna. And it makes me think, how often do we actually look at the perspective of the Virgin Mary, of motherhood, as you address in the show, or of Mary Magdalene? What was her story? And so this idea of accessibility, I think it's just... art is something that I've loved since I was a child. Again, my parents are not in the art world, so I think it was also something that I came to. And in a way, I had to kind of discover for myself. And
Right.
So if I can access that world, I always think, well, I was an outsider, but museums were free where I grew up. So that's what I do on a Saturday afternoon. I take myself off and go and see, spectacular exhibitions at the Tate Modern in London, which was... I was 6 when it opened, and it has this sprawling gallery called the Turbine Hall, and you can't help but just be in awe. And I think it's so much of this book is about, saying that, you can have an opinion too, but also saying be open-minded as well. I think that's what artists teach us. One of my favorite lessons is actually from Jerry Saltz on the 6th of March, which says, and he said this on my podcast, he said, when you're in a museum, turn to the person next to you and ask them what they think.
Right.
And of course, that is going to spark the most interesting conversations. And that's actually something I did at the National Portrait Gallery. There was an exhibition of work by Jenny Saville. And I went up to some 16 and 17-year-olds with the permission of their teacher and asked them what they thought. And I saw the exhibition through their eyes. And not only is that amazing experience for me, but also for them to know that they have agency. You know, someone like Ruth Asawa, an amazing American artist who really sort of takes the spirit of Black Mountain College, which is this extraordinary experimental school, which again didn't encourage the demolition of hierarchies, whether that was art forms, it was teachers and students, it was genders, it was races. And she was an extraordinary educator, and she says, I quote in the book, art will make people broader. It will make people more highly skilled, whatever profession they go into. So it's also to say, maybe it does sit on the self-help shelf as well, but actually, who should say who or not should access art? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I too grew up in a very working class background, and I think I didn't know what an art historian was. I wanted to be an archaeologist because in the 70s in America, you just plopped your kid in front of the TV, and the only channel I was allowed to watch was PBS, public television. So I watched all these dorky shows, and I became a dork. And then I had to rebel against my father, who was a scientist, and who, all these things. So I agree with you and actually really share. I mean, my approach as a curator, especially for a show such as this, is it legible to my grandmother, who didn't graduate from high school? Is it something, I mean, to me, the reason why I love figurative painting so much across the centuries is that it's essential, it's visual storytelling. So I think we should dig into the show and the book. And I just realized as you were speaking that you jump around, between, continents, artists, time periods, and the show does too. So what I did, and hopefully there's no big goofs in it, let's see. I don't know if it's working. Could you maybe do the first slide, please? I tried to select works that are both in your book and in the show, but in some cases not, so we could have a conversation. And as anyone who knows me knows, I'm obsessed with Sofonisba Anguissola, who we don't have any quotes from, right? So I was thinking maybe we could start by talking about her. I just put a quote from an art historian, Anguissola produced more self-portraits than any other European artist in the century that separated Dürer and Rembrandt. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. To me, she manufactured not only her image, but a persona that survives today. We want to know about her. What do you think she would say? What would she say? What would you want her to say in your book?
But what's amazing is you go to your exhibition and essentially it still is those conversations. It might be wordless, but she's saying so much just by immortalizing herself in a self-portrait, but also as in a self-portrait at work. The fact that women artists were working artists as well. I mean, she had extraordinary patrons. And I think here, she's saying, she's looking at us, first of all, with that amazing gaze, those piercing green eyes. And she's showing us not only the restrictions of what women were limited to. So, for example, women artists couldn't paint the nude figure from life until the 19th century. And so those who were in this 1500s, like Anguissola, they had to use what they had around them. So they used themselves, their teachers, their sisters, if they had them. And she's showing us that she was restricted to that. But I love the fact that actually when you see what she's done is she's included a painting which sort of includes a bit of landscape and a double portrait of the Madonna and Child within the painting. I mean, It's saying so much. She's saying, I can do so much more than what you've restricted me to doing. What does this work say to you?
Well, I think there's an essay that was really influential, an art historian for this exhibition, Mary Garrard, who is the expert on Gentileschi, but also she wrote about Anguissola, and the title is, Here's Looking at Me. So I think she's saying, look at me, but she's also saying at the same time with her clothes, don't think of me as a woman, think of me as an artist. Because in this time, the visual conventions would be to be a noble woman, to emphasize her class. She's not wearing jewelry. She's wearing this very austere black coat. And Gerard reads it as her basically trying to transcend gender. And I love that. And she's also saying, you know what, I really know color theory, because encoded in the palette, the whole genre that was invented by women in 1548 is the demonstration and the mastery and the power of knowledge. So I think she's saying, look at me, and in parentheses, all those things. So yeah, maybe we should move on to the next one. I don't think the clicker works. Oh, wait, oops. Wait, go back, please. Can you go back one slide? Okay, well, let's just, all right. So here is a quote, which I hope Katy will read. It's an excerpted quote from her book, and a self-portrait that's upstairs of Hannah Hoch. So maybe would you start with talking about this quote and you know, why and what day does it fall on, if you remember?
I want to show you that there are millions and millions of other justifiable points of view beside yours and mine. Today, I would portray the world from an ant's eye point of view, and tomorrow as the moon sees it, perhaps, and then as many other creatures may see it. I am a human being, but on the strength of my imagination, tied as it is, I can be a bridge.
I mean, I get chills because when I was doing this, like literally in 40 minutes in between a bunch of different meetings today, I couldn't believe how these quotes that I had no idea what they were, when paired with the images, were so resonant. I mean, this painting is a quite rare, Hannah Hoch, for those of you who don't know, was a primarily Dadaist artist known for her radical photo collages. She was a queer woman at a time when the Nazis came to power. She's also kind of in this very melancholic self-depiction, you know, defiant. Even though she's using the conventions of the palette portrait, she doesn't try to conform to the norms of, you know, Germany as fascism is rising. And I read a letter that she wrote at the time of making this, where she's talking about how all of her friends are disappearing and everyone is withdrawing into their own worlds to protect themselves because they know what's coming. I mean, it was so powerful. And then when you read this hopeful quote, in contrast, you see, you know, I mean, you just see the resistance of her practice. I mean, it's just so, I mean, again, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
I mean, it's also so interesting that you include this portrait of hers, because I kind of primarily know her as someone who makes collages, again, which is splicing up images from different points of view, whether it's, you know, a journal here, a sort of a magazine about homes, or a political magazine, or an image from a newspaper or something. And actually she's showing all these different points of view, like splicing them up. And I think about her monumental work, Cut with the Kitchen Knife, which is this, made in 1919, this work that really shows what it was like to be a human being, you know, post-World War I. And why I love art history so much is because it is, for me, the truest record of history, because it's made by people there and then. And what I love about this show, Walking Round, is no matter how much history has tried to erase these voices, they can't actually get rid of the physical object. I lament how many physical objects we've probably lost or been destroyed, but the fact that all of these have been saved and passed down for centuries shows that people were so, first of all, the artists were so willing to show themselves through this work defiantly, but also that they were worth saving because they're relics of our past, but they're also relics from a female point of view, one that is actually not the default. Because, you know, I mean, I think about where I live in London, the National Gallery's, 1% of its collection is made up of women artists. And so when you go to the National Gallery, or I think about why I wrote The Story of Art Without Men, is because the story of art was the story of art without women, because E.H. Gombrich, whose book I referenced, title, fantastic book as it is, had one significant flaw, which didn't include any women artists until the 16th edition. And so it's what I love about her quote is it's like, just if you embrace a different perspective, like you actually will just see the world in a more hopeful way, because I think about the leaders of this world who should just for 1 second try and get out of their minds and just try and see it from that perspective. And one of the most powerful moments in the show is the war, the room about war. And when I think about, work about war, I was sort of taught that it was these kind of battles of soldiers, of men, and fighting and heroicness. And actually, work like that, or I think of someone like Katy Hessel or someone, what actually happens in the aftermath of war is a very human thing. People's lives are lost, innocent lives are lost. Mothers have to take care of their children. Mothers have to carry their dying children. And why do we never consider that perspective of war? Why is the dominant always one thing?
Right. I mean, just because we're on that topic, I think for me, one of the key things was dismantling the gendering of war, which is always, the bellicose male who goes off and the woman at home. And it hit me like a ton of bricks when I read this quote from Zelenska, the first lady of Ukraine, and she said, "This conflict has a particularly female face." And it's true. Not just that conflict, actually. I mean, that war of colonial aggression, every war had a female face because the price, the witnessing, the combatants. I mean, here we're in Warsaw. I mean, there were many women in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, who were women. So to me, it was really important to end the exhibition not on a low note, not on a bummer, but on the resistance, on the opposition, on the resilience of women in times of war. So it's a little hard now to segue to the next slide, but I think we should, because this is an artist that we're both obsessed with, I think, a young British artist called Sumaya Critchlow. I was really pleased to see her make it into your canon, because your books are also like new canons of art history, just like our exhibition is. Can you tell us about Sumaya's quote?
Yes. So shall I read it?
Yes.
Okay. So she says, this was on my podcast a few years ago. She told me, "You live your life and you look back at parts and they kind of accumulate meaning that in moments you won't have known, and then you put it together." And what she means, why I included this quote, is because artists teach us so many different things about how we can look at things, how we can think about time, how we can think about what our life is made up of. And I love this idea that you can go to Alison's exhibition and you can see the exhibition as a whole, or you can just focus on one work. And actually, I love this idea that they teach us about the micro and the macro, or you could be looking at a work and then you could just be focusing on one thing. And actually, it's the same with us. Again, it's this kind of movement of perspectives. And so, Sumaya is a friend of mine, and I run a residency for artists, and she did it a few years ago. And, I wanted to include her voice again as being someone who is, again, really looking back at art history and sort of making us see it anew in so many different ways, power structures, race dynamics.
Right. Sexuality, an embrace of, this is in a room with, Sofonisba, with much more Lavinia Fontana. It is obviously a very provocative, because she combines the palette, portrait, with the nude, with the allegorical self, or the portrait by proxy, because she's always painting women of color, which may or may not be herself. And I was really interested in, the mashup of genres, and how it's also funny, because when we published this work in the book, the head of the publications department couldn't believe it was so tiny, because she said the image in her mind was so monumental. She was expecting to walk in, and it's tiny like the other works from the 16th century, which I think is also a really nice coincidence.
I mean, you reference a small work by Anguissola as well as the portrait that we looked at, but also you talk about Catharina van Hemmersen, who in 1548 produced, as we know, the first Western self-portrait by a woman. And again, these were tiny little miniatures. And actually, I kind of love that idea that Sumaya is taking on these bold subjects, but doing it in a way that plays with that. And just like your exhibition or the story of art without men, I love this idea that art should be a conversation across time. I mean, why was it important for you to meld the trans-historical nature of the show?
Well, I mean, part of it is the fact that, I mean, it's a show that really privileges painting, and that had to do with basically making this legible, accessible argument that this continuity of women as artists across time is very, you know, if you see one painting from 1605 and then the one next to it from 2025, it's this endurance of painting as a time machine. That was very important to me. And then I think painting is painting's favorite food. You know, artists are cannibals. They go throughout art history and they steal, they borrow, they beg, you know, they remix. And I wanted people to have like the after image of one painting going, you know, you see the spinet in Fontana's self-portrait, and then you go in the next room and you see Vestier, who's, you know, painting herself as a working mother with a spinet in the background, and you start to collect all these threads. It's like Scooby-Doo.
I love as well in the exhibition, you know, so much of it, you know, when we think, one of my favorite books on art history is a book called Ways of Seeing by John Berger, and he had this very famous quote, which was, men act and women appear, and essentially men dictate the image and women are just there to be this kind of object. And that's a lot of what art history actually is, whether we think about, especially, I think about like Millet's Ophelia or whatever, and, you know, these women who were sort of models and they were almost risk their lives and sort of bathing in freezing water just for artists to kind of get that image. And what I love about the artists who you've chosen in the exhibitions, for example, Lisa Bryce, is someone who, and again, I think as women as well, it's actually quite fun to play with this idea of the model and the muse and the artist, because there's so much material to do that. And I love this idea that artists kind of physically lift out these women who were kind of objectified or silenced and put them into an active work.
Well, I wanted to jump to Celia, but I think maybe we should just make a little pit stop with Artemisia, because I also used this quote, and in different essays. Will you read it to us?
Of course. She said in 1649, "I will show your illustrious lordship what a woman can do." 400 years ago.
This is her writing to Ruffo, her patron, towards the end of her life. And I think like the audacity, you know, like the audacity, because she was a famous artist, you know, she eclipsed her father. I mean, I don't know if we want to go down that road, but, you know, I found it so amazing that after she testified to clear his name when she was raped, because that's essentially what she was doing, she moves away, her fame and her patronage just eclipse everyone, and then they don't speak for decades, and then she goes to London to help her father finish his commissions, which is an incredible story. I mean, I don't know, like, that's also what a woman can do, not just, you know, steal the show, but then to return to that relationship.
I think, you know, why I always look to artists just in general in life is because, I mean, I've got this quote by actually Celia Poole about being, you know, don't let embarrassment put you off on something. Or I've got this great quote from Louise Bourgeois, which says, you know, be a glass box. Why we go to artists is because they're honest, right?
Yes.
But as a result, the greatest creations have come out of that. You know, people have risked being embarrassed by writing amazing songs, dressing in extraordinary ways, but as a result, you know, forging sort of great creative paths. And what artists do for so many of us, myself included, is they give us permission to do that. Have we had that sort of strange thought that we could think could be a really interesting painting or a TV show or a book or whatever? You know, it's sort of weird what comes out of our heads, but just do it because it might resonate with someone else. And actually, you know, coming back to Artemisia, it's this idea that if she did it, we can do it too. And that was 400 years ago. So actually they give you so much strength and confidence. You think, well, what would sort of Rose Wiley do in that situation, or Louise Bourgeois?
Or again, like you mentioned, Celia Paul, who is also a shared, you know, icon for both of us. She was here last week and she read Painting Myself. But I would love to talk to you about this, serendipitous coming together of this image and the quote you chose for your book.
So she says, there are actually quite a few quotes by Celia in the book because I love her so much. She's an amazing writer, as she is painter. She says, painting is like a room, in that if a painting takes a long time, it's like a room that has been quietly lived in. There are layers of silence built into the layers of paint. Whereas if a painting takes a short time, it's like a room that you've just moved into that has been recently decorated. The echoes are completely different.
So it's uncanny, this quote, because I think when she was reading her essay to us and she was talking about not only the repossession of her image from Lucian Freud, but she was talking about the difference of the experience of sitting for Freud and how he had to constantly talk and paint, and it was fast, and it was like this ADD kind of, scene that I had in my brain. And then she spoke about herself and her own relationships with her sitters, which happen entirely in silence.
Yeah, so I was actually painted by her.
Tell us about it.
So I know Celia because I worked at a gallery when I was younger that represented her, and I've always been interested in her. She's, where I'm from in England, even when I had an exhibition that she was in a few years ago, they said, Freud's lover, like this is the painting of Freud's lover. And when she was 17 years old, she went to the Slade School of Art, and Lucian Freud was her teacher. He was in his 50s at the time, and they embarked in a very long relationship. He was also with multiple other women, and he sort of pitted them against each other, but he also painted a lot of them. And, with Celia, I mean, she's so extraordinary. I mean, this quote, I think that she shows us that, whatever we do, sometimes things have to take longer or things have to take shorter. And sorry, coming back to sitting for her.
She was talking about how, this communication that happens in silence. I mean, she was speaking about her mother, but she also, at the end of the talk, spoke about the young women that she recently sort of expanded her circle, of which you are one. So, tell us about that silent communication.
So I also sit for another artist called Chantal Joffe, and actually when I sit for her, we always chat the whole time. So I emailed Celia and I said, are we going to speak when we, do the sitting? And she said, no, we're going to be in silence. And that was something that completely kind of crippled me. I mean, I was, terrified. I mean, what am I sort of supposed to do, And actually, you kind of go into her apartment, which is kind of up 8 floors opposite the British Museum, and her view is extraordinary because you can see on one end this kind of very phallic BT Tower, which is this modernist 20th century tower, and then the British Museum, which is kind of the, modelled on the Parthenon or the Pantheon, and, is this kind of emblem of Western patriarchal power. Essentially, I mean, if you think about also what stories they hold and colonialism and everything. And so it's an amazing place to be because it's almost like you're in her attic, and she sort of claims that space as her own, and it's kind of a studio cum apartment. She doesn't really believe in owning possessions, and so she's kind of got a chaise longue, a bed, and a studio, and it's like entering Celia Paul's world. And it was sort of transfixing sitting for her because you have to, first of all, sit with your thoughts, but then suddenly they kind of left because you were almost kind of encased or protected by her in this studio that has also, what she's gone through for the last 30 years in that studio is so much. And just this constant, artists, they get up every day mostly and they work and they paint and they are sort of reckoning with themselves the whole time, reckoning with the world. And it was extraordinary. I just looked at the British Museum for, hours, and it was raining, and I just was looking at the scrubs, the way that the rain sort of fell on this sort of bronze brick. And it was silent, but all I could hear was the kind of scratches of paintbrushes that kind of adorned this small canvas. And it was also amazing seeing an artist at work because, again, that's also kind of like...
So intimate. I mean, I think there's the performative artist, and then there's the very intimate artist, and she... we were so honored to have her talk to us here. I think jumping now to Claudette Johnson, another British artist who, for me was really important to have in the exhibition because she's in the room called Education in the Canon. And, we'd make a lot out of the pre-19th century and 19th century, but the struggle continues. And Claudette wanted to see herself in art history. Can you read us her quote?
Yeah, she said, "Each time I come to the mirror, drawing rather than making a painting, it's a confrontation. I never know what I'll find. You think I'd know myself well, but it's a new journey, and I discover something new about what's happening in my body. I see my face as a new terrain that I'm exploring with line, almost like a mapping exercise." And she said this actually, it was a quote from when she was giving me a tour around her exhibition, the Turner Prize, which is the kind of most prestigious art prize in Britain. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's so interesting, because also she was saying it in relation to what does she have access to in her studio? It's herself.
Right.
And I kind of love this idea that we always, we're very much all singular humans, and we all have our ideas and ourselves to draw from. So do that, because also every time you come to it, it will be something else. And I love the fact that throughout her career as well, that work upstairs is extraordinary, but it's from the 1980s, right?
Yes.
And she's still painting today and sort of still painting herself today,
Yes.
but she's seeing herself anew every time.
Well, I think that individuality is something that is so essential to the feminist art historical project, because Griselda Pollock, who contributed to our catalog and who writes about difference. And last week I had this very surprising interview with a Polish journalist who was really interrogating me and really wanted me to say something about the essential, what is essentially female? What is essential, what is women's art? And I kept saying, it doesn't exist. What is, the subject? The body? Is the body women's art? I said, no, I can give you 30 men who make art about the body, starting in, 1300. But I think that this is also something that your quotes also capture, this radical individuality, the fact that we're not trying to make a monolith, not a monolith of feminism, nor a monolith of some sort of essential female art.
Totally. I mean, I have to say, one person did put up their hand in a talk the other day and say, what is the correlation between all of them? And I did say they all seem to live so long. So that, the amount of artists who sort of live after 100 is extraordinary, because their brains are so alive. But there's this one quote in the book by Vija Selmans, who's a fantastic Latvian-born artist who's based in America, and she said, the artist is the instrument, and to sort of never, and the fact that actually everything we make is unique because it's a fingerprint, and think of it like a fingerprint. And I kind of love this idea that even if people are tackling the same subject, or maybe they're writing the same kind of, say, you could give, two screenwriters the same topic for a film, or two directors a script, they would always choose something different, because they would see it from a different point of view. And actually that's what the exciting thing is about the world, that it is this kind of marvelous tangle, that no one was born at exactly the same time on exactly the same day.
Right.
And who also, bodies have been interpreted in every way, or the magic of oil paint has been interpreted in so many different ways. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, we can never box anyone in, because everyone's going to have their own education and experiences.
Right, absolutely. Let's see, I don't remember what I put. Oh, here. This is actually, I'm really glad we got to this. There was a major exhibition, and I'm not even going to try, Ithel Colquhoun, because it's very difficult even for a native English speaker to pronounce her name, who's in the section of the exhibition that deals with eroticism and the female gaze. I was really happy to see she's in your book. So let's start with her quote.
Yeah. So she says, this is she was also a writer. It's from a short story, or her recall. It's from a sort of fictional story, but references her real life. She says, "It is not generally known, and I certainly have never before this realized, that scattered about even the most cancerously urban districts of London, there exists patches and stretches of wild marshy land of heath. Of course, I don't mean the parks. They are as urban as the buildings. these stretchers are different because you can't find them by looking for them, at least it seems to be so, as far as our present knowledge takes. And this was a story about her kind of, during the war, was going round sort of the Bond Street area in London, which is the middle of London, where there really are no parks. I mean, maybe you'll find a square garden, but that'll be it, and it'll be concrete. And actually being sort of finding these kind of sprouts of weeds that were kind of sprouting these extraordinary colourful flowers in that crack in the pavement, and always kind of just looking, being aware. And I think that's what, this quote is in August, which is all about beauty and kind of slow looking and actually looking for that thing. So when you actually find it, it rewards you in so much of a better way.
Yeah, and I mean, she's really been the subject of new scholarship. There was just a big exhibition at Tate, and the painting we have is a depiction of the tantric body, and that this painting actually came out of her observing the wood grain in a door of her studio, and it came to her as a vision. And even though she was part of the British Surrealist group, she was basically kicked out because of her occult practices and her interest in, non-Western belief systems and, tarot and all of these things. So I was thinking that at first the quote was, kind of on a different plane, but of course it's connected to her work.
I love these dialogues. But I mean, this part of the exhibition I found really extraordinary because it's about the imagination as well. And what was it? I'm so fascinated by this idea of imagination and freedom. And what do you think it was that women did? And why was the imagination a place to go?
Well, I mean, that's why, even though I was sort of schooled on the fact that the feminist discourse of the West is not always part of the Polish discourse around feminism, to me, going back to even like first wave feminism and Virginia Woolf and the room of one's own, you had to fight for any sort of space. And many times that space was purely a mental or conceptual space or a spiritual space. So that's why I used that quote from Woolf, no bolt, no lock, no key will set upon the freedom of my mind. And then there was like another subtext in the very same essay, which she delivered as a public talk. She says, yes, there are women who desire women. That was like the best coming out ever before, the LGBTQ movement, right? And Ethel Colquhoun was a queer artist. So I was really interested in, the freedom of transgression, the freedom of, pronouncing your own eroticism, binary, be damned, all of that.
And how do you think that relates to today? I mean, are artists still going for their imagination in that same way?
I think so. I think that, let's not forget that not all of the artists are, from New York or London, right? Or, that we're in Poland where there's, LGBTQ rights are under attack. Women are under attack. The trans wife, the trad wife, that was a big Freudian slip, is this paradigm that's, the populist right is bringing back. So I think that these are, if you fall asleep on the job, these freedoms will be lost. And so, putting your own, whether it's your desire, your self-image, a political statement, a personal statement, these voices are so crucial, and it needs to be ongoing. Frida, here she is. Please read the quote.
Nothing is absolute. Everything changes, everything moves, everything resolves. Why did you choose that quote?
Well, just because I did a search in the book and it was the first, but I like how it interacts with this drawing, El Aborto from 1936, in the sense that, it's about a cycle of life also, which is very much part of the iconography of the work. But tell us, in which month does this fall in your book, and what is it tied to?
It appears in my favorite month, which has sort of weirdly become my favorite month after having written the book, September, which is time. And I'm so interested in this idea of time and the preciousness of it all and the sacredness. And I think artists teach us about that. You know, we go to museums and we think, you know, we're looking at an object that is 600 years old. This is teaching us about deep time and actually how things take time, things that are worth it. It's like Celia Paul's quote, you know, that a painting that has taken more time has different echoes. And actually, you know, what is the world going to look like in 10, 20, 50 years' time? And I think especially when we're doing the kind of work we're doing, which is kind of really kind of reevaluating what the past is and trying to reframe that, we have to do it in meaningful, sort of non-scatty ways. And you know, this exhibition is an exact example of that. It is so thorough and deep and wide-ranging and it just extraordinary. And but also, you know, I think what artists do is they teach us that we're all on our own times. I've got this great quote from Lino Bobardi, who was a great Italian Brazilian architect who designed MASPI, this extraordinary modernist the Modern Art Museum in Sao Paulo, which is this brilliant modernist building. And in it, instead of sort of having the works on the side of the walls, she actually integrated this new way of looking at art, which was through putting artworks on glass panels and sort of putting them in rows. And so maybe you'll have a work from the kind of 1520s or the 1780s or the 1920s or something, but you can see this kind of conversation about time play out. And there's this fantastic quote from her, which says, you know, time is a linear, linear time is a Western invention, and actually appreciating the world being this marvelous tangle. And if everyone was to do everything at the same time, it would be boring. It wouldn't be this marvelous tangle. And so to make you think about, you know, when was this built, when was this plant made, or when was there was human being around, or something. And again, just this, you know, how do we spend our time as well, and how do we appreciate that? And so what was important about having this quote by Frida Kahlo was kind of acknowledging the kind of inevitability of time in so many ways.
Yes, and also the biological time and the biological clock, you know, and the struggle. I mean, her holding the palette and her desire to be an artist, to continue her practice, and her desire and inability to carry a child because of her accident. I mean, the micro and the macro, you know, her biography, which, you know, when you go to high academia, everyone tells you is not important. Again, a very masculinist point of view. Maybe, I think we're almost running short on time, but maybe we could finish with Catherine Opie, because we're in the land of woman born.
She says, ultimately, I think of portraiture as a shared moment. I don't think that you can ever really capture this cliche essence of a person. I think that's how I want it with the audience. But I also want to challenge their ideas and what their beliefs are. I want to try to get to a greater democracy, a greater understanding of humanity.
You know, again, like these serendipitous quotes resonating with the works. I think that, to me, I mean, like I went to undergraduate in California, and I went to, actually, Faith Ringgold was my professor at UCSD, and Kathy Opie taught in LA, and so the, you know, feminist and queer communities very early on knew about her work, and she had a cult following. But I was thinking about today about how, you know, a greater understanding of humanity in this image not only upsets, you know, the kind of repressive forces that are darkening our skies. She has the word pervert carved into her chest. She is also, you know, this proud queer mother who, you know, a journalist asked me, like, would you be able to do the show in the United States? And I said, no. I mean, not this year, not next year, probably not even 5 years ago, because, you know, the society wants to erase this image. And yet this image is so generous.
I mean, it's so extraordinary, you know, that you chose this as well, because of what we think of the idealized mother and child is, you know, everything sort of stems back to the Madonna, which is so oftentimes, you know, painted by a man. And it's not to say that men can't paint that at all. It's just to say, why have we never accepted or celebrated or really prioritized motherhood from a female perspective? And especially here with Kathy Opie, I mean, physically showing the wounds in which she has faced and the scars that remain from being a queer woman in America. And also, why can't queer women have motherhood as well? And I love this as well, but also just the reality of everything of this. You know, how often do we actually see what a woman's body looks like instead of a sort of idealized version or an airbrushed version? Or again, you know, the kind of and I love this idea that it's like that she's playing on traditions in portraiture as well. You know, for example, the back of the back of this photograph has these sort of Holbein-esque backdrops, which
Yes.
make us think about regal portraiture, and how she's referencing the Lacton Madonna, which was, you know, a subject that was sort of really popularized in Siena, you know, after the Black Death, when so many people died, because it was about nourishment, it was about regrowth, and seeing, you know, Mary's milk as this kind of nourishing thing that can spark and this magical supernatural thing called life, and that's kind of what exactly she's getting to the core of. And we think, why has that been taken away from us, or why has this been a shameful thing to do in public, or why has it, you know, why are queer people, you know, taught in that, you know, treated that way? And I think, again, you know, the fundamentals of art is that we see a plethora of perspectives. And if we are just open-minded to this image, we might be more open-minded to humanity or society at large.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, ending the exhibition with birth and death, I mean, maybe I am like, I need to go back to into analysis or something, but I think it's very important because of woman born. I mean, until there's, you know, a genetically engineered womb that starts giving birth to humans, birth is gendered, and gendering is not binary. You know, this is what this image says. It's so touching and yet so political, and I hope that that's something, I mean, I know that's something that runs through your work and through my exhibition and my work as a writer. So I don't know, I mean, like, we still have so much to say, but I think we probably need to turn it over to questions, and I hope you guys won't be shy because we don't bite.
Are there any questions in the room? Just raise your hand.
Okay. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for this incredibly interesting conversation. Echo. From your point of view and from your experience, what are the subjects or themes that you think female artists should be exploring more nowadays?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think they should, there's no single subject. I mean, I think, if anything, I hope one comes away from reading Katy's book and seeing a show like that is that artists, women are artists, period. There's no other special thing. I mean, yes, there are special things that they can say about the experience of motherhood or about war or about any other subject, but it's a tough question to answer.
I wish I had the English version because I can't speak Polish. But there is a quote by Tracy Emin in the book which says, you know, at times when, you know, dark political times, who is going to be the most disadvantaged in your society? Oftentimes it's women. And so I think if anything, and she says, as a result, it's sort of more important to speak louder and to champion louder and to celebrate louder. And so if you are a woman and you want to do it. We need to hear your voices. And like Alison says, you know, don't ever put yourself into a box and create whatever you want. And I think it goes for any gender as well. I think we have to be celebrating those who are at a disadvantage because, as Ursula K. Le Guin says, you know, resistance and change begin in art. And actually it's so powerful. Did Artemisia think that her work, Susanna and the Elders, would be seen in 2025 within this theme? I mean, no, but what she does is she makes work because she has to. There's a great quote from Zoe Leonard as well in the book, which talks about it wasn't like I sort of wanted to make this work. It was like, I have to just make this work right now, because you never know how that work is going to resonate with yourself and different people in 1 year's time, in 10 years' time. So I would just say, make.
Any other questions? Można też po polsku zadawać pytania, będziemy tłumaczyć.
Maybe we could end also, on this, because I caught, I'm sure there's going to be questions, but I just, okay,
there is one, sorry. I have a very simple question, because somehow your first book and the exhibition, they could hold the same title. It's the story of art without men. But my question is how this history of art is different from the history of art with men, because is there a difference? And to some extent, I think the answer to Linda Nochlin's questions is like looking for these great female artists within the same art history, whereas there's some cracks. I think in your book, it's, for instance, this short chapter about quilting in United States, and then in another part of the book, through, I think, G-band quilts, you get to the fiber art. And at the show upstairs, there are these moments with, I think, with folk art, with non-professional art, which to some extent, these are the cracks in this very academic, high art history. So that's I had at the back of my mind when asking about how this art history or history without men is different from the history of male art.
First of all, I titled that because it very explicitly references Gombrich's book, which included no women. And, I think your exhibition, that incredible room, which has the Faith Ringgold and it has the embroideries, I think the difference is that the way that it was framed, I don't think there's anything inherently different about work being made by different genders. I think it's the way that sort of art history has prioritized different art forms. So, for example, as you say in your exhibition, 18 months after the Royal Academy was opened in London in 1768, it sort of declared painting and sculpture at the top and banned embroidery. And so what did women have access to? These domestic-like works. And as you say in your exhibition, men were also needle painters, extraordinary ones. And for some reason, they just sort of banished all these different artists. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that, feminist art history is a relatively new discipline. It's 50 years old, and one of the central ideas that it taught us is that genre and gatekeeping were tools of patriarchy. And I thought a lot, when you were asking your question, I thought a lot about Mary Garrard, who wrote a review of Linda Nochlin and I always forget her first name, Sutherland.
And Harris.
Sutherland, yes. Their exhibition in 1976, Women Artists, 1550 to 1950. And she says, there's this utopic hope that this will be the last exhibition of the kind. And it was the first, and she was hoping it was the last. And she talked about the danger of putting women in a ghetto by writing a purely women-only history. And I too share that aspiration that one day there will be not one art history, but a more mainstream art history. And let's remind ourselves that there's many art histories just like there are many feminisms. It's not a monolithic discipline. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that, when I saw your title, I was like, I don't know about that. And then, I understand it, and I think it's a great provocation, and provocation is one of the tools we have in our box.
Yeah, and actually, I would defer to the Guerrilla Girls. I mean, they're fantastic. Poster upstairs which says, "Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum?" Considering that 86% of the nudes on view are female, but only sort of 4% are actually by females. And I love this idea of, again, it's that kind of borrowing and conversing and having conversations across time. I mean, we're not artists. I mean, maybe you are, but we're writers, and I love this idea that also it's a conversation across medium as well.
Exactly. Should we just end with Faith?
So do you want to tell us about this quilt as well? Because this was one of the most amazing stories that I actually hadn't known until coming to this exhibition.
Well, this is the last quilt in a 12-part series called The French Collection, in which these story quilts have narrative written in them, and Faith made children's books as well as art. And in this story, she talks about her alter ego, Willa May, who decides to go to Paris and in the early 20th century. And she, of course, she writes herself into art history. She meets Picasso. She models for Matisse. She has dinner with Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. And then in the 12th chapter, she finally settles in Morocco, and she has her own studio. And she's sitting there with her daughter. And her daughter has been sent to the United States to be cared for while she made her life as a woman. And so she's having this kind of heart-to-heart talk with her daughter in the studio with Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King behind them, her portraits of them. And she just says with great resignation to her daughter, I just wish I could be like one of these great men. And her daughter returns with, but Mom, mothers are as important as these great men. And this is like the conclusion of this epic rewriting of art history by Faith Ringgold.
I mean, I just think that's extraordinary. And this was I actually was lucky enough to, I mean, you knew Faith Ringgold, but I saw her speak at the Tate Modern when she had her exhibition in London a few years ago at the Serpentine. Must have been about 2017 or something. And I mean, I've never seen a sort of standing ovation like it. And she said, and this is like her mantra, anyone can fly, all you got to do is try. And I've always kept that quote so close to me because actually it can apply to anything in life. And I put that quote on the 30th of December when we're sort of gearing up for the next year and you're thinking about what you can take into it and the excitement of what's to come. And then I end the book with a quote, a diary entry from Patricia Highsmith, who wrote the Ripley novels, The Talented Mr. Ripley, and it's 1947 at 2:30 a.m. on New Year's Eve, and it's a toast, and it's toasting to all her greeds, envies, strange desires, loves. May they never give me peace. And it's this idea that especially in this world where we seem to kind of be, AI is almost like people seem to think that it's okay for AI to replace the human imagination, to actually remember our superpower as humans is to create and actually do that, go forth and sort of take these artists behind you and under your wing and take their strengths with you. And I think that's what art can do. I mean, I'm so inspired seeing this exhibition. I mean, I just want to come back. I want to tell everyone about it because it's so moving and enriching and enlightening, and just it's like seeing art history for the first time. It's that exciting.
Well, Katy, we hope you're going to tell the whole world about it because you have a really big platform, and we thank you for coming. And on behalf of everyone who worked on this exhibition, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alison.
We still have one more question here. So can we take it? Just one more.
Thanks a lot. I'm Anna. And first of all, thanks a lot for your extraordinary, fucking awesome dialogue. Sorry for what. And it was very inspiring and super important, especially your energy and your charisma from both of you. And question. What if the women, the artists, don't want to be loud, don't want to make a noise around, just want to exist, survive, to be progressive and active, but in the quiet and calmness way, let's say, don't mean to be, okay, this is not this, with a lot of sensitive, and this is kind of metaphor about not to make a noise and chaos. You know what I mean? The calm doesn't mean to be erased. This is the opposite, something which is maybe much more intense, and this is not a competition between to be loud and quiet. But quiet I don't mean to be nowhere or no exist, if you understand what I mean shortly.
Totally.
Yeah.
I actually don't include this quote in my book, but it's in the Story of Art Without Men. And I learned from Celia Poole. She once said that she learned actually from Gwen John, who was an amazing artist working at the beginning of the 20th century, that you don't need to shout in order to make an impact. And I think that says it all. You do everything in your own way and what works for you. And, you know, my thing is writing books, it's speaking in front of people, but that's not going to be someone else's, and they're going to make just as impact as I will, you know. And so I think take from them, look at those tiny little miniatures that those women did, and they're still around today.
Yep. Thank you, Katy. Before progressing to signing the books, I wanted to ask one of the great Polish women artists, Zuzanna Jangin, to the stage for a little surprise.
Okay. Dzień dobry, witam wszystkich. Hi everybody. Thank you very much to get me in this evening. I would like to say something in English, a little bit broken English, but I would say in English just to honor you. We, in little introduction, okay? In 2018, we established a new art prize. It was an art prize dedicated only for artists, women artists. And our matrons were Maria Anto, which is included in this exhibition, and Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, who actually was included for the Venice Biennale for the first time 4 years ago, first time after 100 years. All her colleagues, including Marcel Duchamp, of course, and Man Ray and others, was there always. But she was waiting 100 years. So she's our second matron. From 2 editions, we also include some matrons of the year, which is Hannah Hoch 2 years ago, and which was Géraldine Richier a year ago. And other Polish artists like Maria Piniska-Bereś, for example. And in 2022, I saw your book in one Paris, or I don't know where was it actually, a place, and I said, well, this is what we do. This is what we would like her to be with us. And we had a ceremony online that time, because our foundation is a little foundation without money, but with a passion that big as yours, or maybe even the same. And you were the laureate. But since then, we couldn't meet each other. So now we are 3 of us. It's much bigger committee, but 3 of us would like to give you this thing, which was waiting 3 years for you here in Warsaw. And thank you very much for being with us, with writing these books. And yeah, that's it. Art historian. Anna is a great artist. Yeah. That's it. A jednocześnie zapraszam wszystkich Państwa 14 grudnia na rozdanie kolejnej edycji i naszych wspaniałych kolejnych 4 laureatek. Dziękuję bardzo.